So did everybody have a good lunch? Thanks to Tristan Tolino, who is the caterer for this whole event. And Tristan is really a big mover and shaker of the food movement in Vermont. And he was president of the Vermont Vermont Fresh Network and has done a lot. So when you see him, give him a hand for all the great work that he's doing. I just wanted to say thank you for coming back and doing this whole conference this afternoon. And we also have at 5:30 back at the River Garden a wonderful, wonderful reception with great hors d'oeuvres and a chance for all of you to do some social networking. And after that, at 6:30, 7 o'clock, we'd like you to cross the street and go to a place called The Works. And we have another reception for you. And it's our farm art exhibit from local artists who have really put a beautiful show. And The Works will have music, more drinks, and more food. So we have a whole evening planned for you, and I hope that you can all stay for it.
Just want to remind people who come earlier that that's Orly Munson, and she's the motive force behind all of this, and Strolling of the Heifers, and the term force of nature does apply in this case. So Owen Milne is going to say a few words about Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, and then I'll introduce our introducer.
Thanks, Phil. And we'd like to say how much we appreciate being down here to support this event, and it's a relationship we'd like to continue going forward, and this is exactly the type of energy that we think builds a thriving state in Vermont. And so thank you, Orly, for being the force that you are. So I'm going to take just a few moments, and in preparation for my little brief today, I spent some time last night going through an update of what the current per capita things are in Vermont that we always love to talk about. Things like the most colleges per capita in the country, the most authors per capita in the country, the most patents per capita in the country, the most libraries in the country per capita. It's interesting. So, we start to, as we'll keep on going along, you see why Vermont's such a great place to live. And so the next one is the most breweries per capita in the country. The most tennis courts per capita in the United States. And as Vermonters, you eat more cooked oatmeal in the country. And so as we, at VBSR, we do a lot of work across the state, and oftentimes you hear a lot of business groups might say Vermont's a bad place to do business. As we look at this list and the other untold list of awesome per capitas, we think Vermont's a fantastic place to do business. So, but I will give you one non-per capita, and that is that when I say that VBSR is the largest business association of its kind in the country, period. So, and we attribute that to a lot of the people that are in this room, and we appreciate all of what you are doing for the state of Vermont. We have a number of programs and services that are designed to help go beyond just supporting an ideal, but to help businesses of any size or type, or even nonprofits, grow in the state. So there's a reason that we are as large as we are, and if you are curious about learning more about what we do and how we help business in the state of Vermont, please feel free to check out the website or contact me. I'll be around for the remainder of the day and would love to talk. Thank you.
A bit of housekeeping. There is, as this morning and all the way through, the main sessions that are formally part of the summit are all over at the Marlborough Grad Center, which I think hopefully most of you found your way around there in the labyrinth of upstairs. And then also there's a pretty lively group of open space offerings at the end of the sessions in the afternoon, starting around 4:30 or 4:15. And we've got the networking that's at River Garden for those that don't want to do an open space. It's an open networking time there, which just rolls into the reception that Orly mentioned. The reception's plural. So you'll be well taken care of, I think, this afternoon. Entrepreneurship has really been at the heart of this summit and the heart of the process that the steering team put together and moved forward with. And entrepreneurship, whether it's coming in the nonprofits world or business, entrepreneurship within government, not a place we usually think of that way, but there are ideas that get spawned and turned into programs and make meaningful difference in people's lives there. And of course in education. So all those sectors have been invited, they're all presenting, and they're all a part of this stream of transformation that we so urgently and slowly need. So I'd like to introduce David Guyman, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the Organic Trade Association, who is going to introduce our speaker, who is not from Vermont. He is from the next state over. And this is a regional summit.
Thank you, sir. Well, I should have checked all my per capita facts, but I would venture to say that probably Vermont has more organic farms per capita, at least close to it, than any other state in the nation. So I'm going to check in on that, though. Thanks. So Gary Hirshberg is the husband and writer of Meg Hirshberg and the father of 3 yogurt eaters. He is the president and CEO of Stonyfield Farm, the world's leading organic yogurt producer, and the author of Stirring It Up, How to Make Money and Save the World. Gary frequently speaks on topics including sustainability, organic agriculture, and the profitability of green business. Since 1983, Gary has overseen Stonyfield's growth, from its infancy as a 7-cow organic farm school to its current $370 million in annual sales. Stonyfield has enjoyed a compounded annual growth rate of over 23% for more than 19 years. By consistently producing great tasting products and using innovative marketing that blends the company's social, environmental, and financial missions. Stonyfield entered into a partnership with Group Dannon in 2001, and Gary is now Managing Director of Stonyfield Europe, with organic brands in Canada, Ireland, and France. Gary serves on several corporate and nonprofit boards, including Applegate Farms, Honest Tea, Peak Organic Brewing, The Full Yield, Climate Counts, Sweet Green, Ramp Sports, Glennisk, and the Dannon Communities Fund. He's the chairman and co-founder of Stonyfield Cafe, a natural food restaurant firm. In 2011, President Obama appointed Gary to serve on the Advisory Committee for Trade Policy and Negotiations. He is also co-chair of AGREE, an agricultural policy initiative formed by the Ford, Gates, Kellogg, Rockefeller, Walton family, and other leading foundations. Gary has received 9 honorary doctorates and numerous awards for corporate and environmental leadership. He was named a Gordon Graham Fellow at Yale, one of America's most promising social entrepreneurs by Business Week, and one of the top 10 most inspiring people in sustainable food by Fast Company. Gary was also featured in the successful 2009 documentary film Food Inc. And you can also see him in the Just Eat Organic rap video he wrote and performed on YouTube. I'd highly recommend it. Stonyfield has garnered several prestigious awards over the past few years, including EPA Clean Air Excellence, Business of the Decade, Manufacturing Technology by Business New Hampshire magazine, the 2010 Top 10 Leaders of Change Award by the Foundation for Social Change and the UN Office for Partnerships, one of the 5 best large companies to work for in New Hampshire by Business New Hampshire Magazine and New Hampshire Business for Social Responsibility, Best Environmentally Friendly / Green Business in the Institute of Packaging Professionals, a Maristar Award for Stonyfield's plant-based yogurt cup in 2011. Previously, he directed the Rural Education Center, the small organic farming school from which Stonyfield was spawned, and the executive director of the New Alchemy Institute, a research and education center dedicated to organic farming, aquaculture, and renewable energy. Before that, he was a water pumping windmill specialist and an environmental education director with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He has authored books on wind power and organic gardening. It is my pleasure to introduce Gary Hirshberg. Thank you.
I realize it's after lunch, so it's nap time, so I'll do my best to keep you focused here. I was just visiting over at the Organic Trade Association, which is actually on the 4th floor of the Marlborough building that we were at, and I saw yet another, I don't know if you've all seen it yet today. I was driving this morning from Concord, New Hampshire, so I missed the latest bit of circular firing squad nonsense within our organic world, but there's now something out called Organic Spies, which is yet another attack on big versus little organic, and you know the usual kind of stuff that we're having to deal with these days. And it's ironic to have just seen it only minutes ago, because it's in fact something that I wanted to talk with us all about. But I'll come back around to that. Seeing it though reminds me of my favorite philosopher, Lily Tomlin, who says, no matter how cynical I get, it's hard to keep up. I think you'll get the gist of what I'm talking about here in a couple of minutes. I really appreciate what's going on with this conference, and I frankly really, though I do recognize, and you all are taking great pains to make sure that we all understand this is regional, and certainly since we can throw a frisbee to New Hampshire from here, it's helpful for me to know that. But I also very much appreciate the Vermont roots here, and really the 10-year legacy of the strolling of heifers and all that you've been doing. I think this opportunity to pause at least once per year now with this conference to take stock of where we stand in the effort to bring sanity to our food system is not only welcome, but it's really absolutely essential. I've been working on the issues that we're here talking about for actually 3.5 decades. You can see it in the gray. And while we've made decent progress in growing the organic movement, really, from a handful of true believers, some of whom are in this room, by the way, to the status of a bona fide $30 billion industry, providing about 4% of America's food and fiber. The truth is that when you look at what this movement is all about, when you look at the decline of the disappearance, not just decline, of 1 million family farmers since I was a boy, since 1960, we don't have another 30 years to get this ship corrected. We actually don't have the time that we've had to evolve to this point. And so there's an enormous pressure and urgency, I think, to share these lessons today and to engage in these kinds of dialogues as never before. And before we get into some of these challenges and opportunities, what I want to do is I want to put this movement that we're here to celebrate in what I think is the proper perspective. I want to share a few adventures that we've had along the way in these couple of decades, not so much because I want to look back, but because I think what we're really talking about here is about inventing the future. And as the old adage goes, if you don't learn from the past, then you're just doomed to repeat it. And many of us who are grasping and really making traction now with this whole notion of organic, of local, of sustainable, we don't have the time to relearn the lessons that a lot of us gray hairs have been through. So I want to try to share some of these with you. Again, I've been doing this stuff since really 1976, which is, I calculated last night, 60% of my life. And along with a lot of other wonderful people in this room, and a lot of many nonprofits and activist groups that we've all been a part of, Stonyfield and I and all of us have tried to develop not only ecological, not only notions of new ways of looking at agriculture, but really new ways of thinking about economics that embrace and support principles of ecology. And you know, like the folks who inspired this conference right here. Thank you. I think that we're at a very poignant moment. I think we not only need to expedite our evolution quite rapidly, given the scale of the challenges, but I also think that we need very definitely to address this issue of our own MO, our own modus operandi within the kind of progressive movement. The word circular firing squad, as I used it, is really something that I've resigned myself to, but I find that it's just very odd that we progressives spend as much time infighting about sort of making the perfect the enemy of the good as we do doing our very important and good and important work. And obviously I represent nowadays big organic, I suppose, although I don't even know if I know what that means. So I want to talk to you about that. But what I really want to do is remind us what the context is of this work. And just to set the stage, let me just be a little bit personal for a moment. I grew up right next door in New Hampshire, in just the outskirts of Manchester, which is the largest city in the state. It was once, in my day, southern New Hampshire was a bountiful agricultural region, actually, certainly a bountiful agricultural state. And I watched it suburbanize during the course of my childhood and my own life. We bought our eggs, our chickens, our turkeys within blocks of where I lived, what are now blocks. And our lamb at holidays was from folks down the road who knew all the animals' names. The milk was supplied by farms that were within 10 miles of our house, that was delivered in glass bottles at the doorstep. I know, I'm not that old, right? This is not that long ago. And my children, I have 3 college-age kids now. They've grown up 18 miles from there. They've grown up in Concord, New Hampshire, from where I spent my childhood. And while they know that they're avid organic gardening parents, my 18-year-old daughter calls us the organic freaks. So those of you who have adolescents know something about what I'm talking about. It's not their fault. It's just an illness. They'll get around. They do come back. I've watched the oldest start to emerge from it. So have faith if you're there. But nevertheless, as they've complained over the many harsh hours of labor, composting and double digging and weeding and planting and harvesting vegetables, to be honest, they would not recognize anything I just described to you about my own childhood. It is as foreign to them as going to another country. And that's, of course, what we're here to try to reverse. It's a way of life, the way I grew up and the way many of you grew up, is a way of life that really disappeared within one generation. And again, all you have to do is look at the statistic of the 1 million family farmers who were here and who are not here. So I hardly need to lecture this audience about the transformation, but the fact is that the disappearance of our local farms and our farmers and the demise of the rural communities that we've all known and grown up with has really been accompanied by equally disturbing and parallel trends, which I began studying back then when I was studying ecology and climate change and dendroclimatology and other esoteria of the day back then, although very much in the norm of mainstream science today. And I learned back then in the early 70s what we all know today, and that is that we have really evolved down a flawed path as a species, as a society. Not just in terms of our relationship to nature, which of course we have absolutely abused and screwed up, frankly, but also on really we built our economies on really fundamentally flawed assumptions. In fact, I would even go further and say outright myths that go to the heart of how we govern ourselves and how we think about economics. We've had these basic myths, like the myth that waste is an acceptable byproduct of our economic activities. There's no such thing as waste in nature. Everybody here knows that. The waste of one system is always the food for another. The myth of a place called Away, where we send our waste. Some of you have heard me tell the story that when I was building, we exceeded the capacity of our local wastewater system in Stonyfield. We had to build a waste treatment plant. The traditional approach to waste treatment, which is still very much in the norm today, from generations of wastewater engineers who learned that the solution to pollution is dilution. We take our biological waste, add it to water, oxygenate it, agitate it, add some chemicals, and then we're left in an aerobic system, we're left with sludge, lots of it. And in my case, it was going to be a truckload of sludge every single week that we would have produced if we had built one of these really antiquated but conventional systems. So I asked our local authorities, well, what do I do with the truckload of sludge every week? And they told me it's very simple. You send it to Vermont. That was, this is a true story. That was literally their answer. And of course, I was sitting there thinking about Ben and Jerry's, sending it back to New Hampshire, and thinking we could have midnight sludge, trading at the Connecticut River. And anyways, I didn't want to deal with that. We built, as the happy punchline is, we built an anaerobic facility. It's a biogas digester. It generates fuel that runs our facility. Frankly, it's been incredibly profitable for us. Dramatic reductions in water, energy, labor. No sludge, by the way, being produced at all. It's just quite extraordinary. But that wasn't my point. My point is that we had this idea of a way. It happened to be Vermont in that case. It's just completely mythologic. There is no such place, as we see with climate change. We have the myth that the Earth is infinitely resilient to handle whatever abuses we deal out. We actually think this. No, we don't. We'll say those words, but we actually behave this way. Or no one will particularly say these words, that we believe that the Earth, we have the myth that the Earth is a subsidiary of our economies, that it's there for the taking and it's there for the dumping. And actually, the exact reciprocal is what's true. In the history of humankind, all economies have been made possible by a bountiful Earth. We are the subsidiary of the Earth. But we behave literally in a very deep way exactly the opposite, okay? And so I'm trying to say all of this to underscore the scale of what we're taking on. And then we have the ultimate myth, the one that I think is the most pernicious of all. And it's the myth that we allow ourselves in our economic theory called externalities. It's this allowance that we give ourselves. You remember externalities. These are the direct consequences of our economic behaviors, such as climate change, such as a national obesity epidemic, such as a national diabetes epidemic, such as the fact that 41% of us, according to the latest, the President's Cancer Panel, are going to be diagnosed with cancers. These are direct consequences of economic choices that we make as a species, but they don't appear on our income statements. They don't appear on our balance sheets. Therefore, in economics, they don't actually exist. And more importantly, more profoundly, no one's held accountable for these. And this is how deep we're talking about here, okay? We're not just talking about, helping to stimulate local agriculture here. We're talking about rethinking the fundamentals of our economic system. And of course, these myths go on and on. They reveal themselves in ample ways that I don't mean to overly depress you, but my intent is to depress you a little bit for a point that I'll get to. And I think I'm doing a good job, right? Yeah. So, I mean, for example, water now. In my lifetime, our lifetimes, water has been seen as a renewable resource. We now know it's a finite resource. It's being talked about as the oil of the 21st century in ag circles. Worldwide water usage has actually doubled every 21 years in the last 100 years. And it's mostly due to unsustainable irrigation and soil management practices. Topsoils, 50% of the topsoils that were here when Lewis and Clark made their way across the country are gone. They're literally, they've disappeared. And the net result of putting more marginal land into production, or, in the past, in history, of course, we just went to new places when we burned up our topsoils. By the way, we're not the first culture that's done that. The Greeks did it, the Romans did it, the Mesopotamian cultures did it. And these cultures expanded to other places after they burned up, after they depleted this resource that is not renewable unless we renew it. And the net result of that is that what we've done is we've stopped having horizontal areas to go. We've gone deep. We've gone down into the ground. We pulled up natural gas, which we turn into fertilizers. You all know the story. And we've increased our global fertilizer use in my lifetime 100-fold, 100 times per hectare, per acre in this country, because we have not engaged in the true process, the true ecological process of building systemic fertility or capacity, and relying instead on annual infusions of drugs into our soils. You know about hypoxias. There's 400 of them. We're killing off estuaries from Chesapeake Bay to the Gulf of Mexico with allowing nitrogen runoff. You know about biodiversity problems. We're now losing 50,000 species per year, one species every 20 minutes. But to me, the most serious, even of all of this depressing stuff, you're now wondering, why did they invite this guy to come talk to us here? The one that troubles me the very most of all of this is the toxification issue, which is it's profound. And really, we've been on a 70-year spree with chemicals. You know, people say to me, Gary, organic's a really nice idea, but it hasn't actually been proven. But actually, I would say it's the chemicals that have not been proven. And yet the data is coming in. I just quoted the President's Cancer Panel. And by the way, this panel, which was primarily staffed by Bush appointees, so don't think this is a partisan point of view, implicated the number one reason that 41% of us are going to be getting cancers is that we have is the day-to-day exposure to chemicals, primarily in our air, our water, our soil, but primarily in our food. We're exposed to somewhere between 80 and 100,000 human-made chemical compounds every single day, and nobody has looked at the synergistic impacts because there's some 3 billion combinations. So only a fraction of those have ever, only a fraction of those have ever been tested for toxicity in adults, let alone children, and so forth. So it's against this background that the question was asked earlier of your Ag Secretary about GMOs. And I just want to really speak to this because ultimately this will come back around to this question of entrepreneurship and what we're doing here, as you'll hear in just a moment. You know, despite 30 years of incredible progress in the organic movement, we now face, I think, the greatest threat yet. And it's really the fruition of several decades of seeding and investing by the world's largest chemical companies to create a sense of urgency or even inevitability about GMOs. I mean, our policymakers, the majority of our policymakers in DC actually have drunk and in some cases bathed in the Kool-Aid, okay? That, you know, we must deregulate genetically modified crops to feed the world, to feed the 9.2 billion that are going to be here. And we have to learn from what has happened, because in what can only be described as a truly brilliant, even diabolical, certainly elegantly orchestrated effort to fund research that yielded the desired results, to donate millions of dollars to campaign war chests, to purchase congressional and senatorial seats, not to mention a few presidential seats, which has the added benefit of winning a Supreme Court, which did probably the most profoundly destructive decision in the history of the Supreme Court with the Citizens United decision a year ago, which, I trust you all know, allows corporations to give unlimited amounts. This says corporations are people too. It allows corporations to give unlimited amounts to campaigns and not even report. And then they've invested on top of this in this diabolical campaign tens of millions of dollars in lobbying efforts to help glue the whole sort of pernicious package together. And the net result is now that large numbers of decision makers across our nations really believe that these technologically advanced seeds are critical. Now here's the only problem. 13 years after introducing genetically modified corn, soy, cotton, and other crops, but primarily those three, into our food system, not only have they failed to fulfill the promises of higher intrinsic yields, and this is hard data that I'm sharing with you, but farmers using these crops have actually increased herbicide use by now close to 400 million pounds in 13 years. That's a tenfold increase in herbicide use or reliance on systemic toxins. The alfalfa decision that was mentioned earlier today on this stage in January was solving a problem. This is the decision to deregulate genetically engineered alfalfa. This was solving a problem that didn't even exist. Only 7% of alfalfa out there was using herbicides. And so now the deregulation of herbicide-tolerant alfalfa, which we know will spread adventitiously and through pollen, is profoundly bad news, particularly here in the Northeast, where one of the things that we are really good at growing is grass. Alfalfa is hay, of course. I think everybody here knows this. And so now we're seeing, on top of the tenfold increase in reliance on these toxins, we're seeing actually the most dangerous trend of all, if I haven't scared you enough. And that is, and we're particularly seeing this in the South, an explosion of these so-called super weeds, these herbicide-tolerant weeds. As the farmers have put more and more herbicides on the crops that are now tolerant of the herbicides, the weeds have not stopped to do market research to figure out what to do, right? They've just evolved very quickly to becoming herbicide-tolerant themselves. And when you have herbicide-tolerant weeds, when the herbicides aren't working, then you put on, you know what, defoliants. And this is exactly what's happening. Literally 2,4-D is on, Vietnam era 2,4-D is on the increase in our country. So my real question, and by the way, just not to drive you absolute batty today, but Monsanto's CEO, you know, but incidentally, you understand these chemical companies sell the herbicides They sell defoliants, and they also own the seeds. And in fact, Monsanto's CEO recently announced that half their profit growth this year will come from GE seeds. This is a chemical company making half their money from the seeds. So they whipped us and our policymakers into a frenzy that GE is the only hope for our future. Now the problem, folks, as we sit here today and look at inventing a different kind of future, is these genies don't go back in the bottles. Once they're out, they're out. Superweeds, herbicide-tolerant superweeds, you can't say, go away now, we don't like you anymore. 90+% of corn and soy are genetically modified in this country. So what are we going to do about this? So my first question to you today is, are you depressed enough yet? Okay? And I'm serious in asking the question because it's really important, because I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I know who I'm talking to. But I really believe deeply that our challenges today are greater than they've ever been before. And that we need completely new, and I mean political solutions as well as economic solutions here. We need a completely new approach to dealing with these problems, which of course is the point of this conference. But we cannot be confused. This is not your hippie mom or dad's organic movement anymore, okay? And the folks who built their economic power in the 20th century in an era of innocence, ignorance, but also blindness and also denial about externalities are not your average status quo. Okay, well, these economic interests have a serious interest in holding on to their control of the marketplace. And I'm out there in the marketplace. I see this every single day as they try to crush me like a little ant. And in many cases, they're pretty successful. They're very good at what they do. They are quick to use words like sustainable and green and natural, even though those words can mean absolutely nothing because there's no legislation behind them. They're not like organic, which has regs with penalties and teeth. Natural means, I always say there's ice creams out there that don't change shape when they melt. They still say natural on the label, okay? You be the judge. And although fat and sugars taste great, they're quick to say, okay, thanks to Michelle Obama's heroic work, they will move out of some of they will reduce fats and sugars, but they're just as quick to substitute in other synthesized solutions that are just as bad for you or possibly worse in the first place. And they're really good at marketing the images that they want Americans to buy into. Yoplait took a page, for example, one of my competitors. You may have heard of them, little company. Yoplait took a page, and they admit it, out of Stonyfield's book, by using their yogurt lids to promote once a year breast cancer awareness. And to give credit where it's due, they've raised millions of dollars to fight breast cancer. My wife is a breast cancer survivor. It's a subject near and dear to me. But if they really wanted to do something about breast cancer, they should just switch to organic. It's very straightforward, and somehow they haven't yet listened to me, but we're still working on this. So I have this really simple idea that if it's going to be in a package for consumption, it ought to be food. I know that's kind of radical, right? But it actually ought to be made of real food. So I want you, there was a method to my madness here, and you'll forgive me for layering on a lot of what you already know, but I think we have to understand the scale and the scope here to be truly focused on the work that we're here to empower ourselves to pursue. I want you to take stock of all these feelings of shock, dismay, outrage, anger, incredulity that we in the 21st century could still be such an immature species and so underdeveloped to produce foods that make us sick in a manner that makes us sicker. I want us to really feel that outrage. And I want to take inventory of the fact that in the entire so-called national debate about health care last year, you never once heard the words preventative care, even though the cheapest and best health care is to not get sick in the first place. That's a lot of what we're here to focus on. We didn't debate health care, we debated sickness care, which needed to be debated, but we need to get on with real health care. And I want you to take the full measure of the fact that these economic interests, these folks who made their money and established themselves in the 20th century on so many false assumptions and mythologies, are allowed to do this because we consumers are allowing them to do this. This, in the end, is our greatest challenge and our greatest opportunity. And I want you to take all these feelings and ask yourselves, am I doing everything I possibly can with whatever I'm doing today to reverse these trends? And that's the question I asked myself back in 1977. I went to New Alchemy Institute. Many of you will remember I learned that it was possible to produce completely nutritious foods without recourse to not only using toxic chemicals, but also without fossil fuels. We were growing food year-round We had birds, bees, bananas, butterflies in a greenhouse on Cape Cod with no fossil fuels being burned, none at all. And I learned that. I learned that by mimicking nature's complexity and by using the waste from one system to become the food for another, that we could actually feed 10 families 3 meals per day, 365 days per year on a tenth of an acre of New England. We had the science back then, and frankly, it's gotten a lot better now, and a lot of people in this room are responsible for the progress. But what we lacked back then was an economic model that could prove to doubters that we could fuel our economy with these strategies, that we could create jobs, that we could increase exports, that we could take ourselves to scale. In other words, we weren't showing the status quo industry, food industry, how they could profit from these strategies. And then when Ronald Reagan came in, and you'll remember the cuts, day one, the cuts of organic research, of renewable energy, basically everything I was doing, that stimulated us to launch our little business. And Stonyfield was really launched out of the ashes of that. We began turning the milk from our 7 cows into yogurt for sale for the very reason that we needed to come up with an economic model. We needed to support our activities, and the grants had dried up. That's the true story of Stonyfield Farm. We borrowed $35,000 from a group of nuns, literally the Sisters of Mercy. We actually got a nun with the deal. We got a bookkeeper. She came along with it. Pretty good for 2 Jewish guys, I'll tell you. But, I often look back at those days, and I have some friends here who were with us in those days, and I say, I'm reminded, it was crazy. Starting the organic yogurt business in 1983, very few Americans were eating yogurt, and nobody knew what organic was. I often say we had a great business back then, we just had no supply and no demand. But, I'm reminded of Churchill's famous quote that success is the ability to move from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And by that, we've been very successful and enthusiastic. But what I want you to understand, the entrepreneurs in the room, is that, we went through 9 years of doing the impossible. 9 years until we made our first penny. 9 years to get to a whopping $10 million in annual sales. And believe me, we burnt through lots and lots and lots of money. We made tons of errors. But where are we today? Today, we're supporting 1,600 family farmers. Average herd size is 70 cows through the crop Organic Valley Cooperative. Their milk is out there. In 2010, in 2010, we actually bought our 1 billionth pound of organic milk. I did my Vermont statistics on the way over here. We bought 50 million pounds of organic milk from Vermont in 2010. That's $14 million that we injected into the Vermont economy, and obviously a lot more into New England. Our milk purchases alone this year will support over 180,000 acres of chemical-free farmland. That's avoiding, just to put it in hard numbers, about 9 million pounds of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, about 425,000 treatments of synthetic growth hormone or antibiotics that are avoiding over 185,000 pounds of insecticides or herbicides. So these are decent numbers. And as important as the volume of our purchases are the practices that we've developed, which can definitely be scaled so that large processors can absolutely source from, reward, and support sustainable family farmers, growers, and fishers. And I want to underscore this. The point of my remarks here is we need an economic model. And regardless of your feelings about scale, the reality is, we need both. We need the very small, we need the very large, as I'll hope to make the case here in the last couple of minutes here. Just to give you a sense of some of these practices, the key that you need to understand is that my gross margin, and I think you all know what the gross margin is, the margin that's left after if I take my revenues, I deduct my cost of goods, what's left for me at the back of the yogurt works, before the yogurt goes out into the world, before I spend anything on advertising or sales or G&A, my gross margin is 10 points worse than Yoplait or Danon's, okay? They're in the 40s, I'm in the 30s, okay? Just 1,000 basis points. And yet my net margins, my bottom line, are better than theirs. Something happened between gross margin and net margin that allows me to make it up. And it's pretty straightforward, and I'll come to it in just a second. But let me underscore why we are where we are. First of all, of course, we pay our farmers 60 to 100, our dairy farmers 60 to 100% more than they get for conventional milk. Now that's not such a great statement because the problem with that is the denominator. Because conventional milk doesn't pay any family farmer in this country a wage worth a damn. Farmers cannot make money on conventional milk. particularly right now with corn prices going through the roof. So frankly, organics is the only solution that I see for dairy farmers, and I know there's plenty who will debate me on that. But believe me, their kids, the next generation doesn't debate. Kids are leaving those farms in droves because there's no economic future. By the way, the exact reciprocal is true with our organic dairies. 100% of our dairy farmers, 100% are engaged in one or another process of passing on to the next generation. That is, farm kids. I have farms. I have organic farmers. I have one dairy farmer in Vermont who told me when he was conventional about 15 years ago, he was telling his kids to get out of dairying, and we eventually convinced him to switch to organic. He went through the transition. We funded him through the transition. Today, his 3 children each have an organic dairy farm. They've actually gone from 1 to 4 farms. By the way, he's still farming. He shouldn't be. He's in his 80s now. But he's making money. And he said to me, he said, I made more money in the first year, once we were fully transitioned to organic, than I made in my entire 40 years before this. And that's a sad fact. I mean, most of our dairies in this country, conventional, are living off of their depreciation. That's why you see the barns run down and the fences run down. They're just not doing the maintenance and repair. So we, as a company, we provide transitional loans to get them through the 3 years. We provide technical assistance for on-farm manure management. That was talked about earlier today. Veterinary assistance, biogas digesters. We fund local feed mills. We fund, even if it's not our customers, the Maine Organic Milk Group, the split-off group of 9 farmers in Maine. Stonyfield provided the founding dollars to get them up and running. We couldn't buy their milk; they were too far away, and so forth. But we got them up and running. It's by the way, the dairy cows on these farms, they live, I don't know if you all know this, they live 100% longer. They live twice as long as conventional farms. So that's why the UVM study came out and showed these farmers, our organic farmers, are earning the bottom line, somewhere between 70 and 80% more than their conventional counterparts. We also buy about 30 million pounds of non-organic, non-dairy ingredients. And we buy nothing non-organic, so let me be clear about that. We buy 30 million pounds of non-dairy ingredients. We're involved in the sourcing of over 80% of the agricultural crops going into our ingredients. That's how crazy we are about this stuff. We want to know where it's grown, who's growing it, how it's grown, how much they're paid, what are their practices, and how are they impacting the environment and their communities. And to wit, for the 140 commodities that we buy, because of course in the yogurt business you buy a lot more than milk. It's cocoa and sugar and fruits and so on, flavorings. We've actually created grower scorecards and toolkits to try to educate and motivate our ingredient growers about sustainability issues and practices, which actually help them to improve biodiversity, help them to decrease water use, help them reduce greenhouse gases, help them to improve labor, but ultimately help them to make more money. And I could give you lots and lots of examples of this, but with time limited here, I'll just tell you that we actually literally conduct life cycle analyses with most of these growers. So we're able to work with them on reducing footprints as well, and it's all for the purpose of getting them more profitable, because at the end of the day, we think our supply chain's economic health is critical to our economic health. And so there's lots and lots of examples, from buying, DHA, instead of buying it by harvesting whole fish, our DHA, our omega-3s, come from fish waste, which is just basically using the waste from a system for food. Our organic vanilla, by choosing to use only organic vanilla instead of something that is allowed under organic standards called WANFs with other natural flavors. For the last 25 years, we were actually a pioneer in the development of a market for organic certified vanilla, all the way back to the 90s. And today we represent actually about 15% of the world's demand of organic vanilla from this one little company across the river here. Organic bananas, our Banana Source is a cooperative of small family farms in a really remote area of the Caribbean, right on the Nicaragua border in Costa Rica. By paying a premium price for their produce, we are actually participating in keeping over 100 families not only out of poverty, but actually they're making more money per hectare than any of the farms in the southeastern Talamanca region. And maybe the best example of all is our organic sugar. I was at a workshop, Vern's wonderful workshop earlier today, where there was a discussion about size and scale. And the question is can you still practice organic at scale? Let me tell you, we buy organic sugar now from a cooperative of 40,000 acres in Brazil. And it's an absolutely extraordinary agro-eco story. Since the traditional way of growing sugarcane, if you all know, or harvesting, is you go in and you burn the fields. And when you burn you do that to get access to the cane, because there's a lot of leafy matter. Obviously, there's a lot of photosynthesis going on to make sugarcane. So you're left with a huge amount of biomass, which in our limited human mentality we see as waste. Get rid of the leafy matter; it's done its job. So we burn it, which is obviously a global warming, contributor of the first order. And if you've ever flown over these fields during a harvest, and I have, it's just an enormous increase in CO2 into the atmosphere. And it's doubly stupid because you're actually burning up the nutrients that were built up in the topsoil during that season, which means you have to replace those nutrients next year with synthesized fertility, which has obviously a much greater footprint. So our farmers, our partners in Brazil, determined they didn't want to be part of this linear, extractive, polluting system, so they started green harvesting. What that means is they literally shred the material that is as they're harvesting the sugarcane. And here's the punchline. The topsoils underlying these fields are now equal in carbon content to the native forests that were there when the colonists went in there. It takes 100 years to build an inch of topsoil through nature. They're building inches per decade. Those fields, I mentioned the statistic about Lewis and Clark and the 50% of our topsoils, those fields are never exposed to the erosive effects of wind or water, because as they're harvesting the sugarcane on the low PSI tires so they don't compact the soil, the duff matter is built up about 1 meter thick around there. So there's enormous amounts of biota. So they've had a 90% reduction in pest damage since they were conventional. They've dramatically improved their topsoil content. They've increased their groundwater and improved their groundwater quality and volume. They've had 189 species. Actually, that number is dated. It's 312 species that have actually returned to these fields now in the latest biodiversity survey. So they're actually creating an entire food chain. There's cougars bigger than me that wander in these fields because the whole food chain is intact. But here's the punchline. They've had a 10% increase in yields over when they were not organic per hectare with lower inputs. So their yields are going up, their inputs are going down, and that means that today, right now, organic sugar costs exactly the same as conventional sugar. Because on the conventional side, input costs, we all know, at $100 a barrel, or it's probably 94 today, but those input costs are going up, and the yields are not going up. They're either staying the same or dropping. Here's a little subtlety about this operation. They put so much carbon matter into the soil that when they have a drought, which they have about once every 3 years, the organic producers deliver everything to market because that matter retains the moisture, stops it from being evaporated into the atmosphere because there's carbon in the soil absorbing it. The farmers nearby, most of them never deliver their crops their full harvest because they don't have they're losing all their water, and it's too expensive to keep irrigating and replacing. So anyhow, the bottom line here is that we have a lot of examples of success at our scale. And certainly the greatest success, I want to bring this right back to what I said before, has been this gross margin model. Understand that, again, my net profitability, I'm supporting farmers at a proper price, they're making money, which has to be goal number one, right? The nurturers of our land. And yet I'm still making more money than my competitors, even though my gross margins are poor. Now, how do I do that? It's very simple. I don't spend as much on advertising. By doing the right thing, by making something that's really delicious, and by making something that people believe in and feel good about. And of course, that's why we use our lids and our packaging and our social media, and that's why to my daughter's horror, I wrote this rap song. It's whatever it takes, right? And I'll just tell you quickly the story of why I know this is true, this economic model is true. Some of you have heard this story, so forgive me, but I love it because it really taught me everything I needed to know about marketing. I was standing in Florida about 2 years ago. I was holding a competitor's cup at the shelf. It's actually 3 years ago. And I was reading an ingredient. I still frankly don't know what it was. This is a non-organic company. And a little old lady came up to me and tugged me in the elbow and said, "Young man, somebody your age really should be eating the Stonyfield instead." This is a true story. And I said, "Well, why? Why is that?" And she said, "Well, do you know that they give 10% of their profits to environmental causes? And they were the first dairy in America to pay farmers not to use synthetic growth hormone." And she started rattling off these statistics. I said, whoa, how do you know this stuff? She said, "Well, to be honest, my husband died of colon cancer about 6 months ago. And I want to be around for my granddaughter's graduation, and I want to see the kids get older. I'm not ready to leave yet. And the girls and I, she was referring to her bridge club, we go to the websites of the companies whose products we buy. And, here she was, attacking an unsuspecting consumer, right, in the market, telling them, and of course I hired her on the spot, right? But she told me everything I needed to know, that if you do it right, if it's delicious and it's nutritious, and you talk about what you do and you promote what you do, your practices, that's as good as advertising. It may be more effective than advertising, because ultimately loyalty, which stems from emotions, right? Loyalty is an emotional reaction. That's really the Holy Grail. That's what we ultimately want. So to me, to encompass what I just shared with you in a very simple paradigm or very simple summary, I would just say simply that what I set out to prove with the 7 cows back in 1983, and what everyone here is trying to prove every day, has been proven. One can create commerce where everybody and everything wins. I know this sounds like really Pollyannish, and maybe he's got something else in this cup, but there, in the history of agriculture, going back to the earliest civilizations, it's always been about taking soil, taking water, taking habitat, taking away farmers' rights, taking away the rights of those yet to come, of future generations, taking away consumers' rights to safe and healthy food. And what I now understand, that what we've done, is we've created a model that doesn't have to be this way. Our farmers make more money. Our shareholders make more money. Our employees make more money. Our employees even get sabbaticals, where if you've been working 5 years, you get 2 months of paid leave to go off and refresh and recharge yourself. Our livestock, I've already mentioned, they live twice as long. Our retailers, by the way, make more money because they penny profit on a more expensive product. Our distributors make more money. The planet has made more money. These have all been accrued ecologic wins, not just economic wins. And so have our children, because we've actually been building topsoils, creating a basis for farmers' kids to take over the family farm or start their own. And so I want to be clear on this issue of scale, this circular firing squad, this thing that we fall into, big organic, small organic, local versus not local. Honestly, we need to do it all. We need to do it all. I mean, my wife and I garden and farm. We are members of our local co-op. We belong to the first CSA in America in Temple, New Hampshire. We belong to multiple CSAs today. Obviously, we walk the talk. And Stonyfield supports hundreds of these initiatives, hundreds of these per year. But there are compelling reasons to get to scale as well. And let me try to close by quickly summarizing 5 that motivate me. Number 1, there's 1,000 reasons to eat organic food. There's one reason not to, and it happens to be a very good reason. It's too expensive. Organic still remains, 24, 28, 30 years later, it still remains food for the elite. And the only way that we're going to get it affordable and get it access to the billions without screwing the farmer is scale. I'm able to do that. I learned that in the early days when Peter and Bunny Flint started supplying us with milk from Chelsea, Vermont, and we had to send a truck up to Chelsea to pick up the milk every other day. And then we picked up 2 farms and 3 farms and 4 farms and 5 farms. But the farms were spread out all over the place. The costs per load, per gallon of milk were ridiculous compared by the time it landed at my plant. Because don't forget, it's not just, the price isn't just what we pay the farmer, it's the price that has landed to me. And so, and Peter and Bunny needed other farmers to get to scale to buy grain and feed and to get veterinary assistance. There were no vets in Vermont at that time who could work with them on homeopathic techniques that were needed to be organically certified. So they had to get to scale. We had to get to scale. And again, there's a lot of myths in this whole cheap food thing. I don't mean to say that when I say we've got to make ourselves more affordable, I don't mean to tell you that I bought into the myth, the American sense of entitlement about cheap food, because it is a myth. We pay a lower percentage of our incomes on food than any country on earth. That's a true fact, by the way. And a lot of it, by the way, is because it's subsidized. In fact, we're subsidizing through our tax dollars, and this gets me into the campaign finance wrap that I don't have time to give you today. But nevertheless, we still can't hope that people are going to move as quickly as they need to towards organic if the premium remains up here where most folks can afford to be here. And so I'm attacked often by folks, friends, peers, for selling to Walmart, but that's exactly why we're in Walmart. Because there's a whole lot of our fellow colleagues out there, a whole lot of our neighbors and friends who can only afford to buy their foods there, or at least that's, that's where they're buying. And so we want to be there. If you believe in the principles of organic, you got to believe that organic food should be everywhere that food is sold. That's airports, talk about food deserts, etc. I also want to say that, just as an example of a technique to bring the cost of organic down within range while not screwing the farmers. Understand, I keep this price up there. Our price is always between 60 and 100% more than conventional, no matter what. So, but for example, we were, thanks to Michelle Obama, there was a solicitation made to sell multi-pack yogurts into some Western school districts. And our little six-pack of Yo Kids is too expensive as a six-pack, so we put our brains to this and we figured out, because we couldn't compete with Dannon and Yoplait as an organic product, we figured out that if we could turn our six-pack into a 48-pack, therefore using less cardboard, less packaging per cup, we actually got to the same exact parity price as Dannon and Yoplait, and we're able to sell organic food into schools at the same price as those guys while the farmer still earns the proper income. That's what I'm talking about, okay? That's the kind of technique. But I need to be clear with you. I promise you, my wife refers to the first 9 years, and a lot of you are living it, so I say this with empathy. My wife refers to the first 9 years as the bad old days. In those days of hand and mouth, of not knowing, of the milk pump going down, and the power going out, and not having enough money to do repairs, and you all know these stories you're experiencing. I couldn't have done some of this stuff at that scale, and so I'm deeply empathetic. I understand. Second argument for getting to scale: we need to fund and expedite the transition from conventional to organic, and the only way we do that, don't forget, these farmers go out on a limb for 3 years, in many cases, or 1 year with their livestock. They have to pay the higher costs and get a slight decrease in yields for the first couple of years before the yields rebound, but they're not being paid the proper price for organic. So we have to fund that transition. John Hamilton is here. We have a fund through the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund where we do exactly that. Organic Valley does the same thing. For us, finding economic ways to deliver the foods, to show them the markets and then help them through transition requires scale. Third, we really need to eliminate the broken subsidy system in which we're underwriting truly regressive practices in this country. That too takes political power and scale. John Tester, the senator from Montana, has actually gone on record saying the Farm Bill is broken. As we go into it, it's a grab bag. It's a game of large corporate interests going in there to get what's in there for them. And the possibility that we're going to get really progressive change as fast as the planet and we need it through the Farm Bill are very difficult. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be playing in it. But to level the political and economic playing field out there, we need economic power. So we need to get to scale, whatever that means. Of course, we need campaign finance reform, as I mentioned. That too means we've got to reach large numbers. Fourth, and this is the one that I'm spending 95% of my time on, we need GMO labeling. We need to have a national label law. This is a right to know issue, okay? This is in Europe, I don't know if you're all aware, GMOs are actually legal in Europe. People say they're not legal in the EU. They are legal, but there's a labeling requirement. And so 82% of Americans, by the latest polls, say they don't want to buy GMOs, but they don't know. Most consumers say they don't want to buy GMOs, and yet 90 to 92% of the soy and corn and cotton that is out there has now been contaminated with these seeds. So we need a labeling law. And by the way, I think Vermont needs a labeling law, and we could talk about that some. But the point is, again, the marshalling, believe me, the forces that I'm talking about challenging, the power, the clout, we've got the science, and we've got the people. And we've got we have the data that shows that the promise of GMOs are not being delivered. But what we need is the organized political effort, and that is another argument for scale. And finally, we need to prove the cradle-to-cradle notion. We need to prove the idea that we can have an economy, going back to my New Alchemy days, where there is no waste, where the waste of one system is the food for another. Our new packaging that was just mentioned can feed the earth. It can literally go back into the earth. And our Greener Cow program, where we're actually helping farmers to get off of corn and get onto flax, high omega fatty acid grains, which allows the animals to live longer, be healthier, improves the omega-3s for us, reduces methane output. By the way, burping is actually bigger than the other end. But again, the research that we're doing on this stuff is only affordable because I've reached the scale where I can do this. So my time is up, and I really want to underscore what I said earlier, just in conclusion. We have the data on our side. We have an enormous opportunity as a movement here. What we need now is we need the political clout. We need to go beyond. My plea to all of us in this movement is that we don't make enemies of ourselves, that we avoid the circular firing squad stuff. We need large organic processors, and we need small local operations as well. If you prefer to buy your milk or yogurt directly from Jack at Butterworks, more power to you. I love Jack and Ann. They're some of my heroes. We stopped making unhomogenized yogurt a while ago, and you can go to my website and see. We tell people who want to buy unhomogenized yogurt to buy Butterworks. So believe me, we walk our talk. We believe in this stuff. But this business that I'm talking about here is a really big deal. Because when I look at this email that just came through today, this stupid video that's attacking good, hardworking people, and you'll see it, it's 12-minute, yet another attack by folks, progressives attacking, quote unquote big organic. I want to tell you that we make enemies of ourselves. We spend money, and we as a processor and the OTA and others have to spend money to defend against this stuff. Now there's a big summit happening in Boulder in June. We're all going to try to get together and sing Kumbaya and see if we can get all the different interests here. But I want to understand, let's have the debates, okay? Let's have the debates. Let's go for the science. Let's do it respectfully. Let's do it responsibly. But let's be mindful of the consequences of making the perfect the enemy of the good, because we don't have the time to do that. And there's a lot of excellent reasons to buy local, but what was mentioned before, I can tell you, carbon footprint is not one of them, okay? If you can buy organic and local, obviously, we should all be doing that. But transportation is a tiny fraction of the total footprint. And really, a banana, we in the North, we've discovered, coffee, tea, banana, vanilla, cocoa, sugar, stuff that isn't grown in Vermont, although I guess climate change may solve that problem. But the reality is that, when we buy that stuff, there's a toxic footprint somewhere. I always tell my teenagers, when you flick a light switch on, there's a puff of smoke that goes up somewhere. But when you buy something non-organic, there's a chemical footprint somewhere. And the reality is those families I mentioned in Costa Rica would otherwise, if not for us and our buying, they would be living in, and you've seen the pictures, they'd be living with 55-gallon drums of stuff from the typical Banana Republic practices. So in closing, to me, the challenge of creating sustainable solutions is no less than the challenge of completely regrouping our relationship to nature. Indeed, regrouping our economics. It's also about fundamentally acting responsibly. I want you to remember something that the infrastructure rebuild that we're talking about here for veterinary, for equipment, for slaughterhouses, for processing, for transportation, for seed, for refrigerated storage space, all of this stuff happens because of our numbers. And so we do need to do it all. We need to do every single thing that we can be doing. But we need to take these steps, and we need to get millions of our fellow Americans and Westerners and humans to get on board. The single most powerful thing that we can be doing, along with everything else we're doing, the reason I asked the question, are you doing everything, is to get the average person to choose organic whenever they shop. That act alone, whether it's at a CSA, at a farmer's market, at a supermarket, at a restaurant, at an airport, or even a Walmart, we need to remind ourselves that a purchase is a vote. And in a capitalistic society, which we've got, and we're not going to change that in the time that we need to change this, change the ecologic factors here, a purchase is a vote. And in this world, believe me, corporate America, policymakers, and all others follow those votes more than they follow even electoral votes. Those dollars, when they accumulate and they turn into campaign dollars, that becomes meaningful. And the guy from Walmart said it in Food Inc. He said it was really easy for them to take a position against synthetic growth hormone. The reason was because their consumers were asking for it. It's the most powerful thing we can do. Maybe you can't afford to buy everything organic, But even, an item here, an item there is going to shift the game, and that's what we have to be talking about. I'll end with my favorite quote that I often ended on, because it's just so true, and this was Gandhi's. He said, anyone who thinks they're too small to make a difference has never been in bed with a mosquito. And in Vermont and New Hampshire and Northern New England, we know all about mosquitoes, right? That's the way we've got to be. We've got to buzz and we've got to bite. Let's not buzz and bite ourselves. Let's get out there and buzz and bite and change the way we consume and we think and create a world that our children will be proud of. Thank you so much for listening.
A couple of questions?
Sure.
And then we'll break for 15 minutes or so, and some of the people may want to get their technology set up over there while the questions are happening. And we'll start sort of 3-ish over at Marlborough, and the open space will hopefully give a little bit on the other end too. So we'll have we've got that networking time to sort of ease into.
So, questions, comments? Yes, right there.
So first off,
I'll repeat your question.
first off, I just want to say thank you for all of the great things you're doing and helping to change things. My concern, maybe not for right now, but 5 or 10 years down the road, is that with climate change and with peak oil, that your inputs are going to be getting more expensive. And at that point, in order, as a corporation, you'll have to continue cutting costs somewhere so that you can make more money. And so I'm wondering if sustainability is actually written into your corporate charter, and if so, how so that these good things can continue.
Okay, so just the question in a nutshell was, as we face the inevitable inflating costs of a fossil fuel-based economy, and my business is, of course, uses fossil fuels, and we're under pressure for profits, will we be, in fact, cutting? And do we have a charter, or do we have protections built into our mission, our organizing charter and our bylaws that will protect that? Is that the gist of it? So there's a whole lot of really good points in there, and please understand that we've been in business 28 years, so we've already been through what you're talking about. The pressures have mounted. I think that the $100 per barrel oil was one of the great things that has come around, and it's unfortunate because we're finally starting to be real. You saw the explosion of activity. Suddenly, Priuses are selling again, and rolling Parthenons or Hummers or whatever they're called are not. But then look at this. We've dropped back to 92, 94 bucks, and we've forgotten that stuff. And so we need to adjust ourselves to the realities you're talking about, for sure. So let me talk to you about our charter. And Terry Molnar's sitting here. We've spent a lot of time. Terry's on the board of Ben & Jerry's, another company that's had to face up to some of these issues. So it's better than in my charter, because my niche, my place to be, is selling organic food. I cannot go the conventional route. I have to pay farmers the proper price. I have to support my supply chain. What that means, and some of you are aware that Stonyfield became partners with Danone in 2001. I'll tell you what that. Danone owns Dannon and Evian, bottled water, among others. They bought out all my shareholders, all those shareholders who helped us get through the 9 years of the bad old days, which was 297 of them. Some of you are in this room. I needed to get them an exit, so I did. And that wound up being about 80% of our company. So we sold 80% of the company to Danone, which is not an organic company. But they left me with 60% voting control. I want to say that again to you. We sold them over three-quarters of the company, but they left me with majority control, which I still have to this day, 10 years later. Now, why'd they do that? Well, first of all, they were completely bewildered by our business model. Here we were growing at these compounded double-digit rates. Organic foods last year, even through the recession, grew at 6.5% in America. Conventional food grew at 1.3%. Organics grew 5 times faster than conventional in a recession, despite higher price. Stonyfield, you heard the numbers in Dave's opening. We have a 23% compounded growth rate now running. It's actually 20 years. I got to update that bio. So Danone doesn't understand the model. But they're certainly believers in it, and they're certainly profiting from it. The issue for them, very simply, is as long as we're performing as a company, they're not going to touch this thing. And I have yet to meet the consumer out there who says, "No, please give me the yogurt with more pesticides in it," or the one with the synthetic growth hormones. In other words, we're in a growth. This world that we're in here today, this is a growth sector. Every piece of bad and depressing news out there, waking us up to the fact that we've been making ourselves sick and sicker, is actually very, very good, unfortunately, sadly, for this segment. But I want to go deeper to your point, and if I didn't answer you, I hope that you'll say so I can further make sure that I do. But you're 100% correct. We've got to get out of plastic cups. And yet, because it's oil-based, and so the multi-packs that I just mentioned are made from plants. Now, they're made from corn, which is not our goal. Corn is a transitional step. So why do we do it? Why do we switch to corn? Why do we switch to from plastic to corn? Well, the answer is very simple. We got a 48% carbon footprint reduction that we couldn't ignore. The cups are about half the weight before, so we're transporting less. In fact, it's so strong, this material, that it actually dulls the knives that we use to cut the multi-packs. And so we had to actually come up with sharper knives. But it's a step, it's a transitional step, and we did it on an open source basis because we want Yoplait and Dannon to do this, and Breyers and others, because when we get more scale, corn was the one form of plant-based material, resin, that we could afford. The one that we want is ag wastes, or even methane waste from waste treatment plants. You can actually make polylactic acid from methane. But we can't get there without scale, so I need these larger companies to do it. But it was exactly the point that you're making, is that we saw the $100 a barrel thing coming 4 years ago when we started working on this polymer. And I want to be really clear with you. Waste equals food is the goal here. I mean, in the end, success will not be a cup that goes back into the ground and gets composted. Success will be a fibrous cup that when you finish eating the yogurt, you'll eat the cup and you'll get nutrition. And you think that's funny, but actually I think we're going to be there pretty soon. I don't think we're that far away from that. And so we have taken this, what you're talking about, to heart. I have 9 teams in my company. They're called the MAP teams, Mission Action Plan teams. They are each dedicated to from our largest carbon footprint down to our smallest. The largest is the cows. It's the cow burping. So the Greener Cow Project I mentioned and the methane digesters attack that source of emissions. The 9th largest, by the way, is the employee commuting miles and the food that we bring in for the employees on site. And everything in between, packaging, water use, et cetera, et cetera. And I just want to tell you the punchline. These 9 teams, they're cross-functional teams. They're not, folks who grew up like me, not exhaling, okay? I mean, these are, they're not children of the 60s. You get the gist? I mean, these are, regular, everyday folks who are engineers and computer folks and tech folks and marketers, but they sit on these teams. Some of the teams have 4 people, some have 16. But here's the punchline. Since 2006, these 9 teams have saved our company. We have rigorously measured this, $18.3 million in carbon reduction. So anybody who tells me that there's a trade-off between reducing your carbon footprint and making money, I say go on doing your thing, because I'm going to make a lot more money and I'll eventually buy you. I mean, I'm joking, but I'm just saying there's no trade-off at all. Our obsession with reducing our footprint is to maintain our profitability so we can pay our farmers. It's as simple as that. And so to answer you very specifically, very concretely, our deal with Danone spells out our profit objectives. We know what they are 10 years from now. We know what they have to be. Nothing they do, nothing they charter, nothing they change, nothing that happens in the global economy, no economic meltdown, nothing changes that. It's legislated in our deal. As long as we hit those numbers, we retain 60% control. And so believe me, it obsesses us. Sorry? Well, so far so good. 10 years, it's a good question. But I mean, my belief, I started using the example with the flints. My belief is that I can buy and bundle organic goods more and more and more efficiently with scale and get efficiencies not at the expense of the farmers. I can convert to powder, bring the milk in as powder so I have a lower carbon footprint, and then reconstitute it on the site. I can I can fund veterinary care for a group of farmers in a farther off area so that they don't have to send as far away for the vet, so they can hold they can keep their pricing and I can keep my supply secure. You know, if I had been a conventional dairy buyer, most of the farms that I would have been buying from back then would be out of business today. So, you know, there's built-in efficiencies and security in our business model. But it's an excellent question, and I just wanted you to know that we ask it and try to answer it every single day. Sorry for the long answer. I'll try to be shorter. Is there another question? Oh, yes, sorry, I couldn't see.
Hi. Gary, thank you very much. It was very inspiring. And I've realized that the Senate and the House really do want to get the right policies in. I think they'd like to stop the subsidies. But we, as citizens of the United States, have to go to our individual senators and our Congress, and we have to go with the right bills in hand. And we need to ask them. And I know Ron Paul just introduced the raw milk bill, and last year the energy bill never made it to the floor. And where are we right now, and which bills specifically can we give? Because I know Senator Gillibrand, Senator Schumer, New York, they're very interested in the small farm and really kind of helping dairy make a profit. And I know Leahy from this state, they'd really like to work. And is there a source, and is there a place we could go so that we could join you and get together the citizens of our country to really make the change we need to make?
Yeah, that's a great point. Did you all hear it? So, okay, the gist of it is, you know, how do we bring influence to bear to expedite what a great many folks out there want, which is the elimination of these subsidies? It's interesting because it really is a uniting of the far right and the far left, or the left, because, you know, Tea Partiers don't like the subsidies either. And you know, it was mentioned that Senator Leahy is obviously a believer in this, and I need to confess, I'm from New Hampshire, so I have Vermont envy. Okay, I've always had this problem. You know, if I can keep feeding Pat Leahy organic yogurt, you know, and keep him in there longer, that's good news for us all. The truth is, sadly, that many of the senators and congresspeople will go on the record that they want to eliminate subsidies, but when the Farm Bill debate comes up, they don't behave that way. And that's because sitting outside their office every single day is a plethora of lobbyists, an army of lobbyists. You know, I'm obviously focused on the GMO issue. I can tell you what Monsanto alone has spent. And I'm not talking about on campaign donations, which is a whole other discussion. I traveled to New Zealand in an effort to try to stop the New Zealanders from caving into the free trade pressure by this Republican Congress to accept Monsanto's IP. I traveled with a congressman who received $200,000 last year in campaign donations from one chemical company alone. Okay? But the lobbyists are there to remind them that you know, preserving the status quo gets them reelected the following year. So you have this grab bag problem. Your opening premise is the one that I really agree with. We have to speak louder. The people who put them there, you know, and as a business person, my view on this is that the votes that we cast every single day in our purchases count more than the votes that we actually cast every 2 to 4 years, and I don't minimize those. You know, voting turnout last cycle in New Hampshire was the cause of a swing to the right, like, you know, a violent swing. I mean, literally, the lunatics are now running things over there. This is another New Hampshire friend speaking. She knows what I'm talking about. But we have to amass our economic power. We have to show these folks that there's jobs. The very congressman who received $200,000 of Monsanto donations was stunned when I explained to him that 50% of U.S. alfalfa exports go to Japan, and Japan will not buy at the moment GMO alfalfa. So we have basically delivered exports over to New Zealand or to somebody else. Now, of course, his reaction to that is great. They're going to do what they're doing at the EU right now, which is put pressure over there to weaken the resolve, which is exactly why I was giving this speech over there. It was interesting. While I was speaking, the day after I spoke, was the Christchurch earthquake, which is obviously very tragic, but the Christchurch earthquake prevented one of the great defenders of GMOs from having his rebuttal because he was scheduled that afternoon. So my 20-year-old said, "Dad, the earth spoke." But this is very complicated stuff, and I know you have to get to your afternoon sessions. I would simply say to you that you live in a rarefied environment in Vermont, and I envy you, and we need Leahy in there. And you're right, there is a select group, mostly of Eastern senators and congresspeople, but those very same ones who will be correct on subsidies of crops are wrong on energy subsidies. They'll be wrong on coal, or they'll be wrong on oil. In other words, they'll say, we don't want these subsidies, but let's not touch these over here. And this is why I, again, spoke the way I spoke. That what we're doing here today, and what you're doing this weekend, is much more than just sharing best practices. We're refueling ourselves, but we have to remember that what we've got to be doing is we've got to be reaching large numbers of people. And I'm going to just end with a pitch, a plug. You will see momentarily, by that I mean in the next month, you'll see the announcement of a national effort to get GMO labeling. I wasn't just saying we need like we need. We actually are, there's an effort afoot with many interests for a large, broad-scale effort to go to the FDA, which, by the way, does not require an act of Congress to regulate GMOs. I'm not saying Congress won't call these guys up on the Hill and try to dilute, and they will, and we'll have a big fight on our hands. But consumers cannot have a right to know without a label that says that this might or might not contain GMOs. And so this is a place where ultimately, because I think the subsidy fight is going to be much tougher and much longer for the very reasons I said, this is a place where we could have a win. Particularly while we've got this administration in there. Not that this administration has been completely great on GMOs. In fact, quite the opposite. Let's be clear. It was on their watch that alfalfa was approved. But if you understand the politics of what just happened, that was the fruits of an effort that has really been about 20 years in the making. It was a legal cornering. I'm not excusing, because I talked to the president literally about this 2 Wednesdays ago, and hope to spend an hour with him sometime this summer going through the statistics I shared with you. But the reality is that they did not sense at the White House a political opposition, an organized opposition. And that's why when I see a video like I just saw of one organic interest attacking another, my heart sinks. Because we can't afford that. We have to speak as one voice. And it isn't just organic. This is about just consumer choice and farmer choice. And so I'm ducking your question a little bit because I do think you're right, but I think it's longer term. But in the short term, getting a meaningful law that allows consumers to choose is critical. And whether we're successful or not, let's not lose sight of the real goal, which is to get Congresspeople, the debate itself is what's worth it. To get Congresspeople on the records that they're either for or against consumer choice, that's the battle I want to have. I want each and every one of them to have to stand up there and say, no, I don't believe consumers are smart enough to make their decisions. That's how we'll maybe get some changes in Congress. I know I've used up my time. Thank you so much.